The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council stretched above thousands of seats, each one filled with beings from different corners of the galaxy. Today, the usual calm discussions about trade routes and mining rights had been replaced by pure terror. Emergency lights flashed red across the chamber as urgent messages poured in from every civilized world. Ambassador Hyun pulled out his thermos and poured steaming green tea into a small white cup. The familiar ritual helped him stay calm, while alien voices rose in panic around him. To his left, the tall blue-skinned delegate from Altair was waving all four of his arms frantically, his translator device struggling to keep up with his rapid speech about emergency evacuation ships. On his right, the rock-like Centauri representative was pounding the table with enough force to crack the metal surface, demanding that every available warship be sent to protect the core worlds. "This cannot be happening," shrieked the Altarian, his voice hitting notes that made several nearby species cover their hearing organs. The deep space monitoring stations went dark one by one. Entire star systems have gone silent. Chancellor Vexitar of the Andromedan Coalition rose from his elevated platform, his tall, pale form trembling with fear. His species had lived through the original Zephyrian occupation and still told horror stories to their children. "Citizens of the galaxy, what we feared most has come to pass. The ancient enemy stirs from their long sleep. The Zephyrian Empire, destroyer of worlds, enslaver of civilizations, has returned to reclaim their dominion over us all." The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives from the Vegan colonies were already making calls to charter evacuation ships. The insectoid delegates from the Outer Rim began clicking and buzzing in their panic language. Even the usually stoic silicon-based life forms from the crystal worlds were showing signs of distress, their bodies flickering between different colors. Through it all, Hyun sipped his tea and watched the main display screen with mild interest. The emergency broadcast had been playing on repeat for 6 hours now, but he still found certain details amusing that others seemed to miss. The screen filled with static before clearing to show the bridge of a massive warship. The technology was clearly ancient but well-maintained, with dark metal surfaces covered in glowing symbols that hurt to look at directly. At the center of it all stood War Prime Kelthak, supreme commander of the Zephyrian military machine. Kelthak was an impressive sight, even Hyun had to admit. Nearly 3 meters tall, his reptilian body was covered in dark scales that seemed to absorb light. Ceremonial scars ran across his face in patterns that spoke of countless victories, and his eyes glowed with an inner fire that had intimidated galaxies. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had never been told no. "Inferior beings of this pathetic galaxy," Kelthak's words boomed through speakers in every language simultaneously. "Your age of weakness and comfort ends today. For too long you have grown soft under the illusion of peace. You have forgotten your place in the natural order of things." Behind him, the bridge bustled with activity as dozens of Zephyrian officers worked at control stations. Through the massive viewport, the shadows of enormous warships could be seen stretching into the distance. The fleet looked like it could darken entire solar systems. The Zephyrian Empire reclaims what was always rightfully ours, Kelthak continued, his clawed hands gesturing toward a holographic display of the galaxy. "We shall remind you why your ancestors once trembled at the mention of our name. Every world will kneel, every species will serve, and every act of defiance will be crushed without mercy." The display zoomed in on a small blue planet on the galaxy's outer edge. Earth hung there peacefully, its white clouds swirling over green and brown continents. It looked completely defenseless, just another primitive world full of beings who had barely learned to travel between stars. "We begin our campaign of reconquest with this insignificant speck called Earth," Kelthak announced, his scarred features twisting into what might have been a smile. "Its inhabitants call themselves humans, and they shall serve as our first example. Their destruction will show the galaxy what awaits those who dare oppose the return of Zephyrian glory." The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in absolute silence. For a moment, the only sound was the gentle clink of ceramic as Hyun set his teacup back on its saucer. Then he chuckled. It was a soft sound, barely louder than a whisper, but somehow it carried through the vast chamber's perfect acoustics. Every being in the room turned to stare at the human delegation section, their various eyes, sensors, and perception organs focusing on the man who had just laughed in the face of galactic extinction. Chancellor Vextar's voice cracked with disbelief. Ambassador Hyun, surely you understand the gravity of this situation. Your homeworld has been specifically targeted for annihilation by the most feared military force in galactic history. They ruled over us for millennia before vanishing into the void. Their technology, their weapons, their ruthlessness, nothing we possess can stand against them. Hyun stood up slowly, smoothing down his simple grey suit jacket. His movements were unhurried, as if he were getting ready for a routine business meeting rather than discussing the end of his species. The slight smile on his face never wavered, and his dark eyes held a sparkle that suggested he knew something the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. "I understand perfectly, Chancellor," he said in a voice that remained calm and pleasant despite the circumstances. "If you'll excuse me, I need to contact Earth immediately. Perhaps we could reconvene this session in 48 hours or so. I believe certain preparations will need to be made." The human delegation began filing out of their section with the same casual pace their ambassador had shown. They walked like people heading home after an ordinary day's work, not like representatives of a doomed civilization. The remaining thousands of delegates sat in stunned silence, watching the humans leave. How could any species be so calm about their own extinction? Director Minji stepped into the private elevator, hidden behind a bookshelf in her Seoul office, her hand trembling slightly as she pressed her palm against the scanner. The device hadn't been used in over 50 years, but it recognized her DNA instantly. The elevator began its descent, dropping past the subway tunnels, past the underground shopping centers, past layers of history that most humans had forgotten existed. The ride took nearly 10 minutes as they plunged deeper into the Earth than any civilian structure had a right to go. When the doors finally opened, Minji found herself standing before a massive vault door made of materials that didn't officially exist. The surface was covered in symbols that seemed to shift and move when she looked at them directly. Technology so advanced, it appeared almost magical. As she approached, scanners emerged from hidden panels, reading everything from her retinal patterns to the unique electromagnetic signature of her brain. These security systems had been designed by humanity's greatest minds during their darkest hour, built to ensure that only the right people could access the truth when it was needed most. The vault door split open silently, revealing a chamber that stretched further than her eyes could see. The walls curved upward into darkness, lined with millions of data storage units that hummed with barely contained energy. This was the Vault of Remembrance, humanity's greatest secret, and their insurance policy against a galaxy that preferred comfortable lies to dangerous truths. Ancient holographic projectors activated as Minji walked deeper into the chamber, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. The air itself began to shimmer as three-dimensional images formed around her, so realistic she could almost smell the smoke and feel the heat of long-dead battles. The first display showed Earth as it had been 3,000 years ago, a peaceful, blue marble spinning quietly in space. Human civilization was young then, just beginning to reach toward the stars with primitive rockets and basic space stations. They had been so proud of their first steps into the cosmos, so excited to discover they weren't alone in the universe. Then the Zephyrians arrived. The hologram shifted to show massive dark ships appearing at the edge of the solar system, vessels so large they could be seen from Earth's surface without telescopes. The Zephyrian fleet had been a terrifying sight, their ships designed to intimidate as much as destroy. Each vessel was covered in spikes and aggressive angles, painted in colors that seemed to absorb light and hope equally. "They came expecting easy conquest," Minji whispered to herself, remembering the stories her grandmother had told her. A primitive species, barely capable of leaving their own planet, perfect for slavery or extermination. The display showed the HFY first Zephyrian landing, their massive warriors stepping onto Earth's soil with the confidence of beings who had conquered 100 worlds. They were impressive creatures, nearly twice the height of humans, with natural armor plating and weapons that could level city blocks. Their technology was thousands of years ahead of anything Earth possessed. But the Zephyrians had made one critical error in their assessment. They had confused youth with weakness, primitive technology with primitive minds. The holograms around Minji began showing scenes that no alien species remembered, battles that had been carefully erased from galactic history. She watched human engineers working frantically in hidden bunkers, studying captured Zephyrian technology with an intensity that bordered on obsession. While their cities burned above, humanity's greatest minds were learning, adapting, evolving at a pace that should have been impossible. "Look at this," Minji breathed, pausing at a display that showed Dr. Kim working in an underground laboratory. The brilliant scientist was surrounded by pieces of Zephyrian equipment, but instead of trying to copy it, she was finding ways to turn their advantages into weaknesses. Every weapon system the aliens used became a vulnerability once humans understood how it worked. The siege of Earth lasted 6 months, and to the watching galaxy, it seemed like the humans were slowly losing. Zephyrian forces controlled major cities. Their propaganda broadcasts spoke of inevitable victory, and their commanders grew increasingly confident. They had no idea that every day of occupation was teaching humanity exactly how to defeat them. The display shifted to show Admiral Park standing in the command center of humanity's secret military base, built deep inside the Earth's crust where Zephyrian scanners couldn't detect it. He was younger then, but his eyes already held the steel that would make him legend. Around him, walls of monitors showed Zephyrian troop movements, ship positions, and communication patterns. Humanity had been watching, learning, and planning. "They think we're beaten," Admiral Park said to his officers in the recorded memory. "They think 6 months of occupation has broken our spirit. They're about to learn why that was a mistake." The battle that followed lasted exactly 18 hours. Minji watched in fascination as the holograms showed human ships emerging from hidden bases on the moon, in asteroid belts, and from the depths of Earth's oceans. These weren't the crude vessels the Zephyrians expected, but sleek predators built specifically to hunt their technology. Every Zephyrian advantage became useless. Their shields couldn't stop weapons designed to exploit quantum fluctuations in their generators. Their armor cracked under impacts calculated to hit stress points discovered through months of secret testing. Their communication networks were jammed by signals that used their own encryption against them. The most incredible part was how cleanly humanity won. There were no desperate last stands, no Pyrrhic victories bought with massive casualties. The human fleet moved through Zephyrian formations like a surgeon's scalpel, disabling rather than destroying, capturing rather than killing. It was precision warfare at its most elegant. Minji paused at the display showing Admiral Park's final transmission to the Zephyrian High Command. The alien commanders had been gathered on their flagship, watching their empire crumble in real time. When the human admiral appeared on their screens, his words were calm but carried the weight of absolute authority. "Your empire ends today," Park had said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "You have 2 choices. Surrender now and accept exile to the galaxy's edge, where you can live in peace and maybe learn something from this experience. Or refuse, and we will ensure you never threaten anyone again. You have 5 minutes to decide." The Zephyrian surrender had been complete and immediate. Their entire fleet had powered down weapons and submitted to human authority without firing. Another shot. They had finally understood what they were truly facing. But here was the part that amazed Minji most. Instead of taking control of the galaxy, instead of claiming the territory and tribute that victory had earned them, humanity had simply asked everyone to go home. They had no interest in ruling an empire, no desire to become the galaxy's new overlords. "We just want to tend our gardens and raise our children," Admiral Park had told the assembled alien diplomats. "So you can have your peace, but remember what happened here. Remember what we're capable of when someone threatens that peace." The other species had been so grateful, so traumatized by what they had witnessed, that they had agreed to humanity's simple request. The galaxy had enjoyed 3,000 years of unprecedented peace, not because everyone suddenly became nice, but because they all remembered what happened to the last species that tried to break it. Minji smiled as she reached the final display, her hand moving to activate protocols that hadn't been touched in millennia. Emergency signals began broadcasting to hidden bases across human space. awakening systems that had been patiently waiting for this day. The galaxy was about to remember why the peace had lasted so long and why humanity's friendship had never been refused. Captain Sung pushed off from the wall of mining station Aurora 7's command center, floating gracefully in the zero-gravity environment as emergency lights bathed everything in red. Through the massive observation windows, he could see the asteroid field stretching endlessly in all directions, chunks of rock and metal that had been humanity's cover story for 3,000 years. "Emergency protocols are active, Captain," called Lieutenant Yoon from her position at the communications console. Her fingers danced across holographic displays that were transforming before their eyes. What had looked like simple mining equipment, readouts moments ago now showed weapon systems, shield generators, and fleet coordination networks that shouldn't have existed. Sung watched in fascination as the asteroid around them began to split open like a giant metallic flower. Sections of rock that had seemed natural suddenly revealed themselves to be camouflaged hull plating. Massive doors slid apart with perfect silence, exposing the interior of the largest shipyard humanity had ever built. "Foundry 7 is coming online," reported another technician. "The automated systems have been asleep for 2,000 years, but they're waking up fast. Estimated time to full production capacity is 6 hours. Through the observation deck, Sung could see similar transformations happening throughout the asteroid belt. What alien observers had catalogued as simple mining operations were revealing their true nature. Rocks cracked open to expose massive manufacturing complexes. Innocent-looking ore processors extended weapon arrays that could crack moons. Transportation ships that had carried metal ingots for centuries suddenly sprouted armor plating and missile launchers. The beauty of it was breathtaking. For 3 millennia, the galaxy had watched humans slowly expand their mining operations, thinking it was just another species trying to make a living in space. Trade inspectors had visited these facilities countless times, examining the perfectly ordinary equipment and reading the completely accurate reports about mineral extraction. They had never thought to look deeper, never imagined that every piece of mining machinery could be reconfigured for war production in a matter of hours. "Captain, we're receiving activation codes from all stations," Lieutenant Yoon announced, her voice filled with awe. "Aurora 1 through Aurora 47 are all reporting successful transformation. The entire asteroid belt is now operational as a military installation." Meanwhile, on Earth itself, Professor Jin stood in his observatory, watching the night sky change in ways that would have terrified any alien witness. Satellites that had provided peaceful scientific data to the galaxy for centuries were extending. Antenna arrays that looked nothing like communication equipment. These were targeting systems, each one capable of painting targets anywhere in the solar system. "The orbital defense grid is fully deployed," his research assistant whispered beside him. "Every weather satellite, every communication relay, every research platform we launched over the past 3,000 years, they were all designed with secondary functions." Jin nodded sadly as he watched the transformation through his telescope. The International Space Station, a symbol of human cooperation and peaceful exploration, was now bristling with weapons that could vaporize incoming fleets. Solar power. Collectors were rotating to reveal massive energy cannons. Even the tourist stations that had welcomed alien visitors were extending shield generators and point defense systems. "It's almost heartbreaking," Jin murmured to his colleague. "We've spent 3,000 years hoping we'd never need to activate these systems. Every launch, every satellite, every research mission carried the hope that this day would never come. But the most impressive transformation was happening in Earth's deepest oceans." Admiral So Young felt the gentle vibration through the hull of her flagship as massive doors opened in the seafloor trenches. The Mariana base had been humanity's most closely guarded secret, a construction project that had taken 2 centuries to complete and had remained hidden from every deep-sea exploration mission the galaxy had ever conducted. The ships that rose from those depths were unlike anything currently flying in galactic space. Where modern vessels favored smooth curves and artistic design, these were pure function over form. The Leviathan-class battleships looked like mechanical sea monsters, their hulls covered in sensor arrays and weapon ports that could unleash destruction on a scale the current galaxy couldn't imagine. "All Leviathan units reporting ready, Admiral," announced Commander Juan from his station. "Stealth systems are operational. The Zephyrians won't detect us until we choose to reveal ourselves." So Young nodded as she watched dozens of massive ships rise from their underwater hangars. These vessels had been built during the original war, but never deployed because humanity's victory had been too swift and complete. They represented the backup plan, the overwhelming force that would have been unleashed if the Zephyrians had refused to surrender. "Let's hope our old friends have learned some manners during their exile," she said quietly, remembering the stories her grandmother had told her about the First War. "I'd rather not have to teach the same lesson twice." Each Leviathan was nearly 2 kilometers long, their hulls built from materials that could withstand direct hits from Stellar-class weapons. But their most impressive feature wasn't their armor or their guns. It was their stealth technology. These ships could become completely invisible to any known sensor system, moving through space like ghosts until they chose to strike. Across human space, from the colonies on Mars to the research stations orbiting Jupiter, ancient protocols were activating. Citizens who had lived completely peaceful lives as teachers, farmers, artists, and shopkeepers found themselves remembering training that had been passed down through families for generations. In a small farming community on Europa, elderly Mrs. Zhang was showing her neighbors how to operate the emergency communication systems that had been built into every human settlement. The sweet grandmother, who grew the best tomatoes in the colony, was also a former military engineer who had helped design Earth's planetary defense grid. On Mars, Dr. Yoon was leading his medical team through procedures they had practiced but never expected to use. The hospital where he had spent 40 years saving lives was transforming into a command center capable of coordinating rescue operations across multiple star systems. Even the children weren't panicking. Human education had always included basic emergency procedures, taught as games and exercises that seemed like fun activities. Now those games were proving their worth as entire populations moved with calm efficiency to support roles they had trained for without even realizing it. The most remarkable thing was how smoothly everything operated. There was no confusion, no chaos, no desperate scrambling to prepare defenses. Every human settlement, every space station, every research outpost had been built with hidden capabilities that were now coming online with the precision of a perfectly maintained machine. Alien traders who happened to be in human space during the activation watched in stunned silence as the species they had considered peaceful and artistic revealed the infrastructure of the most advanced military force the galaxy had ever seen. Trading posts became command centers, civilian ships deployed weapon systems, and the gentle humans they had known for centuries suddenly moved with the coordinated precision of a military force that had never stopped training. The galaxy was about to be reminded why humanity's offer of friendship had never been refused, and why 3,000 years of peace had never been broken. The sleeping giant was waking up, and it remembered exactly how to end wars quickly and permanently. War Prime Kelthak gripped the command rail of his flagship Dominion's Edge, his clawed hands leaving deep scratches in the metal as he stared at the blue world growing larger on his tactical displays. Behind him, the bridge hummed with activity as hundreds of Zephyrian officers prepared for what should have been the easiest conquest in their species' history. The Armada stretched across space like a dark cancer, 300 vessels of pure destruction arranged in the classic Zephyrian battle formation that had brought terror to countless worlds. Each ship was a masterpiece of intimidation, their black hulls covered in spikes and aggressive angles that seemed to absorb light itself. Weapons ports glowed with barely contained energy, ready to unleash devastation that could crack continents. Final. "Approach vector confirmed, War Prime," announced his tactical officer, a younger Zephyrian whose scales still bore the bright patterns of ambition. "All ships report weapon systems at full charge. The primitive world lies defenseless before us." Kelthak's scanner readings showed exactly what he expected to see. Earth's orbital space contained nothing but the usual collection of communication, satellites and research stations that marked every developing civilization. Their cities glowed with the soft light of beings who had never known true war, their energy signatures showing no military installations worthy of the name. "Look at them," Kelthak hissed to his bridge crew, his voice carrying the contempt of a predator viewing helpless prey. 3,000 years of peaceful existence have made them soft. They've forgotten that the galaxy belongs to the strong. Their conquest will serve as a perfect reminder to others who might resist our return. The Armada began its final descent toward Earth, each ship taking predetermined positions for the orbital bombardment that would precede the ground invasion. Kelthak could already picture the surrender broadcasts, the desperate pleas for mercy. That would come when the humans realized the futility of resistance. Then space around Earth suddenly exploded with light. Ships materialized from apparent nothingness as stealth fields deactivated in perfect synchronization. One moment, the space around the blue planet was empty. The next, it was filled with vessels that shouldn't have existed. The human fleet emerged like ghosts becoming solid, their numbers quickly surpassing the Zephyrian Armada. But these weren't the sleek artistic ships that current galactic civilizations favored. These were predators made manifest, their designs speaking of single-minded purpose and devastating efficiency. Where modern vessels curved gracefully through space, these were angular killers built for one purpose only. "Impossible," Kelthak roared, his voice cracking with disbelief. "Our sensors detected nothing. Where did they come from?" His tactical officer was frantically working at his console, scales shifting to the pale color of fear. "War Prime, our deep scans show no indication of these vessels existing moments ago. It's as if they simply appeared from another dimension." The largest of the human ships moved forward, its bulk dwarfing even Kelthak's flagship. The vessel was clearly built for war, with weapon ports that could accommodate firepower beyond anything in the current galaxy's arsenal. When it transmitted, the voice that came through was calm, almost conversational. "This is Admiral So Young of the Earth Defense Force," the human said, her words carrying across all frequencies simultaneously. "War Prime Kelthak, you are ordered to power down your weapons and surrender immediately. This is your only warning." Kelthak's blood burned with rage at the casual tone. How dare these primitives speak to him as if he were some minor pirate? He was the heir to an empire that had ruled the galaxy when their species was still learning to make fire. "Impossible," he snarled into his communicator. "We are the Zephyrian Empire. We conquered 1,000 worlds when your species was crawling in mud. Fire all weapons. Show these insects what real power looks like." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every Zephyrian ship unleashed everything they had in a concentrated barrage that should have turned Earth into a lifeless rock. Plasma. Cannons that could melt through planetary crust fired in perfect sequence. Quantum torpedoes capable of destabilizing matter itself streaked toward their targets. Graviton beams that could shatter moons focused their destructive energy on the human fleet. The space around Earth lit up like a newborn star as enough destructive force to sterilize entire solar systems was unleashed in a single moment. The BICE energy discharge was so intense that Kelthak had to shield his eyes even through the bridge's protective filters. Then the light faded, and every human ship was still there, completely undamaged. "What sorcery is this?" whispered Kelthak's tactical officer, his voice barely audible over the stunned silence that had fallen over the bridge. The human ships hadn't just survived the bombardment, they had made it look easy. Their defensive systems had turned the most devastating weapons in the galaxy into nothing more than an impressive light show. But they weren't content to simply defend. What happened next was the most terrifying display of military precision Kelthak had ever witnessed. The human fleet moved like a single organism, each ship knowing exactly where every other vessel would be at any given moment. They flowed through space with a grace that made Zephyrian formations look clumsy by comparison. Boarding pods launched from human vessels, their design clearly built specifically to penetrate Zephyrian armor. These weren't generic assault craft. They were custom-made weapons designed by beings who understood every weakness in Zephyrian technology. "Hull breach in Sector 7, shouted a Zephyrian officer. "They're cutting through our armor like it's made of paper." "Impossible," Kelthak roared. "Our hull plating is impenetrable. No known weapon can—" His words were cut off as human marines poured through the breach. their equipment perfectly designed to counter every Zephyrian advantage. Personal shields that had protected his warriors for millennia simply failed when faced with human weapons. Armor that could withstand plasma fire cracked under impacts calculated to hit exact stress points. But the most disturbing thing was how carefully the humans fought. They weren't trying to kill, they were capturing. Every shot was precisely placed to disable rather than destroy, every movement calculated to minimize casualties while maximizing effectiveness. Within 30 minutes, it was over. Every Zephyrian ship was disabled, their crews captured and secured in their own vessels. Not a single human ship had been lost, and casualty reports showed that fewer than a dozen Zephyrians had been seriously injured in the entire engagement. Kelthak found himself staring at his tactical displays in complete disbelief. His mighty armada, the pride of the Zephyrian military, had been neutralized with surgical precision by beings his species had dismissed as primitives. "Kelthak," came Admiral So-Young's voice again, still calm and patient despite what had just occurred. "Your ancestors tried this exact same approach 3,000 years ago. We kept detailed records of every tactic you used, every weakness. We discovered every method we developed to counter your advantages. We've had 3 millennia to perfect these techniques." Through his view screen, Kelthak could see human ships beginning to tow his disabled fleet toward Earth. The process was conducted with the same casual efficiency they had shown during the battle, as if capturing entire armadas was just another routine task. "How?" was all he could manage to whisper, his voice barely audible even to himself. The Admiral's reply carried a note of something that might have been sadness. "Because humans remember everything, War Prime. Every lesson learned, every mistake made, every price paid for peace. We never wanted to fight this war twice, but we never forgot how to win it." As his flagship was gently but inexorably pulled toward the blue world that had just humbled the greatest military force his species had ever assembled, Kelthak finally understood what his ancestors had truly faced all those years ago. The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council had witnessed many historic moments over the centuries, but nothing like this. Representatives from every corner of the galaxy sat in absolute silence, their various forms of eyes, sensors, and perception organs fixed on the holographic displays showing footage that should have been impossible. The battle recordings played in slow motion, showing the complete destruction of what had been considered the galaxy's most feared military force. 300 Zephyrian warships, vessels that had once darkened the skies of entire star systems, had been neutralized in less than 30 minutes by beings most species still considered primitive newcomers to galactic civilization. Ambassador Hyun walked slowly to the central podium, his footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. He looked exactly the same as he had 3 days ago when the crisis began. Calm, pleasant, completely at ease. The only difference was that now every being in the room was staring at him with a mixture of awe, fear, and dawning comprehension. Behind him, the massive displays continued showing the aftermath of humanity's response to the Zephyrian threat. Instead of destroyed ships drifting in space, the footage showed captured vessels being carefully towed to what appeared to be advanced medical and rehabilitation facilities. Even in victory, the humans had chosen mercy over vengeance. "Fellow beings of the galaxy," Hyun began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's perfect acoustics. "I know many of you have questions about what you've witnessed. The truth is actually quite simple. Humanity never forgot what the rest of the galaxy chose to forget." The Altarian representative, who had been panicking about evacuation procedures just days before, raised one of his forearms with a trembling gesture. "Ambassador Hyun, how long have your people possessed this capability? This level of technology shouldn't exist anywhere in the galaxy." Hyun smiled gently, the same expression that had puzzled them all when the crisis began. "We've had it for 3,000 years. We developed it during the last war with the Zephyrians. The difference is that we chose not to use it for conquest." Chancellor Vextar leaned forward from his elevated platform, his voice barely containing his amazement. "Are you telling us that your species has been watching over the galaxy all this time, protecting us without our knowledge?" "Not watching over," Hyun corrected with a slight shake of his head, "simply available when needed. We meant what we said 3 millennia ago when we asked to go home. We wanted to tend our gardens, write poetry, raise our children, explore the mysteries of science and art. But we also learned an important lesson. Peace isn't maintained by hoping everyone will behave nicely. The holographic displays shifted to show images that made several delegates gasp in recognition. Mining operations in asteroid fields that they had visited for trade negotiations were revealed to be massive automated shipyards. Research stations that had welcomed scientific exchange programs, extended weapons arrays that could level continents. Even the peaceful human colonies that had traded agricultural products with their worlds showed hidden defensive capabilities that rivaled planetary fortresses. "All of this was here the entire time," whispered the Centauri delegate, her rocky features showing the geological equivalent of shock. "We've been trading with you, visiting your facilities, conducting joint research projects, and never realized what we were actually seeing." "Because you weren't looking for it," Hyun replied kindly. "When someone offers you friendship and trade, when they share their scientific discoveries and cultural achievements, when they help with disaster relief and medical emergencies, you don't usually assume they're also capable of ending civilizations. We preferred it that way." A young representative from the vegan colonies, barely old enough to hold diplomatic office, stood up with the courage that only comes from youth. "But why hide your strength? Why not rule the galaxy? With your capabilities, you could have controlled everything." Hyun's smile widened slightly, and for a moment he looked like a teacher explaining something obvious to a confused student. "Because ruling the galaxy sounds incredibly boring. Do you know how much paperwork that would involve? How many trade disputes we'd have to settle? How many territorial arguments we'd need to mediate?" The attempt at humor fell flat in the tense chamber, but Hyun continued in a more serious tone. "The best way to avoid a fight is to be so overwhelmingly capable of winning that no one wants to test you. For 3,000 years, no major war has broken out in this galaxy. No species has attempted to conquer their neighbors. No one has tried to build an empire. Deep down, everyone remembered what happened to the Zephyrians, even if they didn't consciously think about it." The displays changed again, showing scenes of human daily life that seemed almost surreal in the current context. Children playing in parks while their parents worked in gardens, artists creating sculptures that captured the beauty of distant nebulae, scientists conducting research that advanced the understanding of the universe itself, families gathering for meals, sharing stories, laughing together. "This is what we chose instead of empire," Hyun explained, gesturing toward the peaceful images. "We could have ruled you all, demanded tribute, forced our will upon entire species, but we had better things to do. We still do." The silence that followed was profound. Every representative in the chamber was processing the same overwhelming realization. Their entire civilization had existed under the protection of beings who had chosen kindness over conquest, who had preferred gardening to governing. "What happens now?" the Altarian representative finally whispered, his voice barely audible. "Now?" Hyun chuckled, and several delegates recognized it as the same gentle sound that had mystified them when the crisis began. "Now we go back to our gardens. The Zephyrians will be given proper medical care, psychological counseling, and education about better ways to resolve conflicts. They'll be offered the chance to build a peaceful society if they choose to accept it." He paused to look around the chamber, making eye contact with as many representatives as possible. "And hopefully we won't need to have this conversation again for another few thousand years." As the human delegation began to file out of the chamber, moving with the same unhurried pace they had shown throughout the crisis, Hyun stopped at the entrance. He turned back to address the still silent assembly one final time. "Remember, friends, we've never asked to rule you, and we never will. But we'll always be here if you need us. That's what good neighbors do for each other." The doors closed behind, the humans with a soft whisper, leaving behind a galaxy that was finally beginning to understand the true nature of the peace they had enjoyed for 3 millennia. It hadn't been maintained by treaties or goodwill or the natural evolution of civilized behavior. It had been protected by the quiet strength of a species that genuinely preferred growing flowers to conquering worlds, but had never forgotten how to do both when necessary. In the depths of space, human ships were already beginning their journey home. Aboard the vessels, crew members were talking about the families waiting for them, the hobbies they had set aside during the brief crisis, the simple pleasures of a life lived in peace. They had performed their duty with characteristic efficiency, and now they were eager to return to the things that truly mattered to them. Behind them, they left a galaxy that finally understood why the long peace had endured and why it would continue to endure. The universe was vast and full of wonders, and humanity was content to explore them one garden at a time. The greatest empire in galactic history had never wanted to be an empire at all. The end.